Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning. I'm Amy Morris.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with the latest in the race for the White House. Democrats on Capitol Hill are starting to close ranks in support of President Biden, trying to shift the focus away from his mental acuity to Donald Trump's policy goals. We get those details from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
A 2-hour closed-door meeting of the caucus with congressmen emerging saying in vast majority they have reached a turning point and need to line up behind Biden-Harris. Congressman Jerry Nadler, who over the weekend said Biden should step aside, has done a 180.
I'm fully supportive of him. I plan to campaign for him, and it's essential that he win.
And even if they were less enthusiastic, they say the job is to make sure Donald Trump doesn't win. Congressman Pete Aguilar.
Every single member of the House Democratic Caucus is clear-eyed about what the stakes of this election are. Donald Trump cannot be allowed near the Oval Office.
Biden does have a news conference tomorrow. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. So we might have a better idea now of who might be Donald Trump's running mate. During a campaign stop in Miami, Trump teased but did not officially announce that Florida Senator Marco Rubio could be Trump's choice as candidate for vice president, referring to the number of reporters and news outlets covering the rally.
I think they probably think I'm going to be announcing that Marco is going to be vice president. I don't know. Because that's a lot of press.
But Trump did not announce his pick, instead saying that he was officially challenging President Biden to another debate, this time without moderators.
Meanwhile, in Washington, NATO allies are offering Ukraine more help to bolster its air defenses. The U.S., Germany, and Romania will each send Ukraine a Patriot missile system, while a fourth will be assembled using parts from the Netherlands and others. Italy will send a ground-based air defense system. President Biden promised to prioritize Ukrainian aid.
The United States will make sure that when we export critical air defense interceptors, Ukraine goes to the front of the line. They will get this assistance before anyone else gets it. All told, Ukraine will receive hundreds of additional over the next year, helping protect Ukrainian cities against Russian missiles.
President Biden speaking there at an event marking NATO's 75th anniversary. Despite the commitment, the group's leaders resisted offering the country a path to membership.
Well, turning to the markets now, Amy, the S&P 500 begins the day once again in record territory and ahead of day 2 of congressional testimony by Jay Powell. Yesterday, the Fed chair said officials are increasingly wary of potential risks to the labor market from high borrowing costs as they seek more evidence inflation is slowing down.
Elevated inflation is not the only risk we face. Reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will continue its practice of carefully assessing incoming data and their implications for the evolving outlook, the balance of risks, and the appropriate path of monetary policy.
And Jay Powell concludes his semi-annual monetary policy testimony before the House Financial Services Committee this morning.
And in Asia, China's consumer prices hovered near zero for a fifth month in June. Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
Yet another sign that deflation is stalking the Chinese economy. The CPI rose 0.2% from a year earlier, weaker than the estimate of 0.4%. In the meantime, factory gate prices declined 0.8%, in line with estimates. The PPI has been in deflation since late 2022. China's economy is uneven. Some strength in manufacturing, some weakness in consumption. Investors are hoping for a fix from the third plenum next week. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Brian, thanks. Well, a new poll says the U.S. has a largely more favorable image than China. Pew Research surveyed 35 high and middle-income countries. More than twice as many people saw the U.S. positively than they viewed China across 18 high-income countries, with the gap most stark in Poland, Japan, the U.S., and South Korea. That contrasts with views in the 17 middle-income countries polled, which favor both countries similarly.
In company news, Microsoft and Apple have given up its observer seat on OpenAI's board. The move comes as global antitrust regulators step up scrutiny of big tech's influence on artificial intelligence. Dina Bass covers Microsoft for Bloomberg.
this, position of having someone, not a board member, but still a board observer, was becoming a bit of a flashpoint. Regulators were certainly interested in it and wondering what that meant and whether that played into the concerns about Microsoft control as it relates to OpenAI. So this removes that issue, from the table. And I'm sure Microsoft will be hoping that makes some of the regulatory scrutiny go away.
Bloomberg's Dina Bass says Microsoft, which has invested $13 billion in the creator of ChatGPT, sent a letter to the startup announcing its withdrawal from the board.
Well, Amy, 4 unions representing 14,000 workers at Walt Disney's Resort in Anaheim, California, will hold a strike authorization vote on July 19th. And we get more from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
The results will be announced the next day. The employees include food service workers and other staffers at the company's theme parks, stores, and hotels. They have been negotiating a new contract since April. They're seeking higher pay and changes to their work rules. Even if the employees do give their approval, union leadership would need to call a strike. Just authorizing a work stoppage can be a tactic that helps spur management to make bigger concessions at the bargaining table. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you, Charlie. A court victory for Elon Musk. The billionaire defeated one of the lawsuits filed over the firing of thousands of employees after his takeover of Twitter in 2022. The suit alleged Musk owed at least $500 million in severance pay to about 6,000 laid-off employees under provisions of the Federal Employee Retirement Income Security Act. The plaintiffs said workers got severance equal to only 1 month's pay. A district judge in San Francisco ruled the employees' claims weren't covered because the company told employees after Musk's takeover that any who were let go would only get cash payouts.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The return of soaring heat in Houston is deepening the misery for people still without power after Hurricane Beryl crashed into Texas. Many residents have no place to cool off and fuel up as the extended outages strain one of the nation's largest cities. Officials say restoring power is the number one priority. Texas acting Governor Dan Patrick says the utility, Cedar Point Energy, is bringing in an additional 11,500 workers to help.
Workers, linemen, tree trimmers, to add to their force of 1,675 that they have on the ground. And so we expect to see about 1 million customers get power by tomorrow.
Acting Governor Dan Patrick. Opening statements in Alec Baldwin's manslaughter trial are set for today. The trial over the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the Rust film set. A court in Santa Fe, New Mexico, selected 11 women and 5 men for the jury yesterday. They were asked about their thoughts on Baldwin's work as an actor, their opinions on gun ownership, and more. Jurors are instructed not to watch any news about the case or talk about it with friends or family. The Civil Rights Act was the defining moment of President Lyndon Johnson's administration in 1964. 6 decades later, Attorney General Merrick Garland recognized the federal law has not been a cure-all for the country's problems.
The 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 presents an important moment to reflect on why we needed this law in 1964 and why we still need it today.
Garland was emotional at times during his address yesterday about his choice to leave the bench and return to the DOJ, and when he recited the names of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. The Department of Justice says they've disrupted a new Russian disinformation campaign. The DOJ has seized nearly 1,000 social media accounts and 2 internet domains. Officials say those accounts from X, formerly Twitter, used artificial intelligence to create disinformation aimed at furthering pro-Russia narratives. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. It's time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
All right, good morning, Karen. The Yankees at Tampa Bay. Carlos Rodon on the mound, out to end a personal 4-game losing streak. First 4 batters, single, double, single, 3-run homer by Isaac Paredes. The Rays led 4-0 before Rodon had gotten it out. He did settle down. Ben Rice hit a 2-run homer for the Yankees, but the Rays won 5-3. Rodon was 9-2. He's now 9-7. He's not the only pitcher to struggle during this tailspin that has seen the Yanks lose 16 out of 21. The Yankee general manager is Brian Cashman.
You can have that avalanche of positive stuff happen, and it kind of wears on everybody in a positive way. But then, one little thing can add up to a whole bunch of stuff, and next you know you're on the other side of it, where an avalanche negative stuff starts to happen.
The Orioles lost to the Cubs 9-2, so the Yanks are still 3 games behind Baltimore, but they're now only 3.5 ahead of the red-hot Red Sox, who've won 7 of 8, a 12-9 win over Oakland. Mets back to 500 at Citi Field. Great outing from Jose Quintana. 7 scoreless innings, allowed only 1 hit. Washington did get to the Met bullpen. Home runs in the 8th and 9th innings, but the Mets held on, beat the Nationals 7-5. Marquee National League Series underway in Philly. The Phils all over the Dodgers in the battle of division leaders. 10-1. Trey Turner hit a grand slam. Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz have won grand slams this year. They were expected to meet in the Wimbledon semifinals, but Sinner in the quarters lost in 5 sets to Neil Medvedev. Alcaraz 1-4 sets over American Tommy Paul. Last American on the women's side was Emma Navarro. She got trounced 6-2, 6-1 by Jasmine Paolini. She's the first ever from Italy to reach the Wimbledon women's semifinals. She'll now take on Donna Vekic from Croatia. Quarterfinals wrap up today. Matches for both Novak Djokovic and Taylor Fritz. Detroit Pistons just had a season when they won only 14 games, but they do have a budding star in 22-year-old Cade Cunningham. They've locked him up 5 years, $224 million. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Amy.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Amy Morris, and world leaders are gathered in Washington, D.C. for the NATO summit as Democrats are closing ranks around President Biden for the most part. We're joined now by Bloomberg managing editor Derek Wallbank to break it all down for us. Derek, let's start with President Biden. More Democrats coming out to support him staying on the ticket. There's still some questions, though, and more pushback within the party. What are you hearing now from Capitol Hill?
Well, Amy, you haven't heard a ton of Democratic leaders, certainly some, but not a ton, who have come out and said that Biden needs to go. You do hear people saying increasingly, we're worried about Biden. We're not sure that he's done enough to convince us that he can go out and win this thing. Michael Bennet, the Democratic senator from Colorado, said last night, and I'm going to quote here in a CNN interview, a quote, "Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him it and the House." You do hear that sort of thing being said again and again. I'm really interested to hear what Nancy Pelosi has to say. She's going to be on a morning television show, and so let's see what she has to say. So far, she has kept her powder a little bit dry, but been generally supportive of the president. People like her, people like Jim Clyburn, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, those are the ones I think that Biden is in with a chance of listening to. If they were all to break, that would be a red headline-worthy occurrence.
Do you see this becoming an issue at the Democratic National Convention next month?
It's certainly possible, but I would think it has to be solved earlier than that. And I've sort of got 2 reasons for that. One of them is that it's math times 2. The first bit of math is that Joe Biden has an overwhelming lead in the delegate count, and those delegates are pro-Biden delegates. So you would think if something's going to break, it'll break among a different sort of set than that, right? If it hasn't broken before, is that going to be the place where it breaks? The second thing is that there are some ballot deadlines that may conflict and may actually come a little bit earlier, and so there has been a move among Democrats to want to formalize this process earlier, and that was in place before the debate.
Now, all of this is playing out on an international stage that has been brought to the back door of President Biden, world leaders in Washington, D.C. for the NATO summit. Is there an impact being felt there, or is this more wallpaper?
Well, no, I do think there is going to be some impact, right? The goal of the NATO summit is to triumph an alliance that has stood strong for 75 odd years, as well as to continue to provide support for Ukraine, and then maybe also focus on the challenges that China presents in the world. Vis-a-vis a NATO group, I do think that this becomes a question mark. Someone like Sir Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, coming in, he's going to be asked an awful lot about how he found Joe Biden. Is that the messaging he wants to have? So it does complicate things. I also think that it raises the stakes for every time that Biden is meeting with one of these world leaders, having a public interaction. Certainly, the press conference he's planning to hold. All of those things, I think, are going to be very carefully watched. And maybe the headlines out of that aren't about Ukraine, and that's not necessarily what NATO wants.
All right, we've got less than a minute here. Really quick, what else are you watching to come out of this NATO summit? What makes it successful?
I'm watching for concrete talks about Ukraine. I'm watching to see whether or not Russia's attack on a hospital in Ukraine that shocked the conscience of many in the alliance, whether that is an escalatory thing. I'm particularly watching with an eye to November and the uncertainty that a possible Trump administration would bring, what Europeans are going to do in the NATO alliance. It's not going to be a situation where they're going to be able to count on the U.S. to do all of the things if Trump wins, right? All of those contingencies that come out and the question marks that come out. So there really is a question right now. What does Germany do? What does France do? That's what I'm really watching.
You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Amy Morris.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.